Today we're going to take a look at a pretty awesome pilot's chronograph. And well, I think I probably should be most excited about the really great design that's gone into this, the great attention to detail and finishing, the great build quality. I'm really impressed with the functionality of this watch. When I see watches that have a lot of decorative things that aren't really functional, I get a bit annoyed. So I really like it when I see a watchmaker kind of take full advantage of what the watch is meant to do. And this is a watch that is inspired by vintage aviation chronographs, particularly the Type 20 designs, and Hemel just absolutely knocked it out of the park. Anyways, let's check it out. Hey guys, this is Dave. Welcome back to Just the Watch, your budget watch collecting channel. I love to take a look at affordable watches, usually in the $500 or less price range is what I try and shoot for and primarily feature on the channel. And today I'm happy to say that we have a mechanical chronograph watch that comes in right under that limit at $499. And Hemel is packing a lot of watch into that price range. Now this watch is just absolutely beautiful. It is designed after these sort of Type 20 pilot style chronograph watches. So you've got that kind of bicompax design with two subdials on it. It looks beautiful, it's built really solidly, and overall I was incredibly impressed with this watch. Now it does have a few quirks and some complaints that I do have about it, and probably the biggest thing that you need to consider is the movement that's inside of it. This is using the Seiko ST19 chronograph movement, which is probably the only mechanical chronograph movement you're going to get in this price range. And it is a very cool movement, but it has some quirks. I've had a few different watches that have this movement in, and they all seem to have sort of minor issues, and this one is no exception. So we'll get to all that in a minute. But first, let's take a look at what Hemel is giving you for your money here. Again, you're getting a mechanical chronograph watch, sapphire crystal, ceramic bezel, fully lume dial in the version that I'm taking a look at. They have a fully lume dial version and just a regular lume dial version, and a very impressive 100 meters of water resistance. You know, a lot of times when I see Seiko ST19 powered mechanical chronograph watches come through, they feel kind of fragile. They have very low water resistance ratings. This feels extremely solid. I think Hemel has done just a great job in sort of protecting that kind of more fragile chronograph movement. The watch comes in at 42 millimeters in diameter with 49 millimeters lug to lug. At that size, it wears very well on my 7.5 inch wrist. If you have below a 7-inch wrist, you might start to find that a little bit on the large side. But for a pilot style chronograph, I think this is a pretty common and just a really great size for it to be. It's also just a hair over 13 millimeters thick, and you're getting 22 millimeter lugs. So if you do want to swap the strap out, you're gonna have a lot of options there as well. As I mentioned, the design of the watch kind of really draws its inspiration from these bicompax Type 20 chronograph style pilot's watches. The one that I have in is the Panda dial version. So you're getting a 60-second running seconds hand at the 9 o'clock. You're getting a 30-minute counter for the chronograph at 3 o'clock. And then the large second hand is used for the chronograph sweep. And the dial design and handset is very classic and elegantly done. This looks and feels for all the world like a vintage pilot style chronograph, but especially with the Panda dial one, I think it gives you also sort of a vintage racing sort of sporty look as well. They've gone with a sort of soft brown color for the dial, with contrasting black subdials and printing going around it. And this is a fully lume dial, so it looks really cool when you do take it into the dark. Surrounding that, you're getting a 12-hour bezel, which is one of the things that I was most excited about because it just works so well with the ST19 in particular, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the bezel is really beautiful. It's 120 clicks with a ceramic bezel insert, and it is also fully lumed. For the case finishing, I was kind of surprised to see that they went with an all-polished look. Usually for military or sports style watches, you see more brushing to kind of mitigate the amount of scratches that you'll get on it. However, the full polished look really looks beautiful on the case design that they've done. Really reminds me of a very aerodynamic, streamlined look, kind of really evoking the sense of, you know, airplanes from the golden age of flight. Well, the side of the case is flat. There are some nice curves and bevels on the case as well, and it does conform to the wrist very nicely. But now we need to talk about that Seiko ST19 movement inside of this watch. If you've been watch collecting for a while, you probably already know a lot about the ST19 movement. It's kind of had an explosion in popularity recently because it is a hand wound mechanical chronograph movement that you can get in some watches as low as around $200 on AliExpress. And now we're starting to also see some higher end micro brands like Laurier and Baltic and now Hemel use it in some of their more expensive designs. It is a very old movement. It is one that Seiko has been manufacturing for over 50 years. It's based on an older Swiss designed chronograph movement that China purchased and began producing themselves. So it has a pretty nice heritage and history behind it. However, from what I've heard, there can be a lot of variability in the quality of the ST19 movements that go out. If you get a good one, it can be very reliable and accurate and last for a long time, but they do tend to have a higher rate of problems and failure than your typical NH35 or rock solid Japanese movements. Now, this model that I had for review is running pretty well. There's a few quirks to it. Accuracy is great. I've timed it to right around negative 0.1 seconds a day off, so rock solid accuracy. This is a hand wound movement, so you do have to remember to hand wind it. It's not going to, it does not have the automatic winding feature, so if you don't wind the watch manually, it will eventually run out. The amount of power reserve that it has depends on how much you use the chronograph movement. If you're not running the chronograph, it's pretty comparable to your standard 40-hour power reserve. If you are running the chronograph movement even the entire time, it's not going to dip below 30, so you're not going to lose too much. But under normal usage, you're probably still going to wind up getting about 40 hours of power reserve. But because of the bezel that they put on here, you can actually use the chronograph to time things up to 12 hours. So you have that capability in this watch, and that's something that's kind of unique about the ST19 movement. The ST19 movement, the chronograph will continue running after its 30 minutes has filled up. It'll just start it over again. So you have a 30-minute chronograph counter at 3 o'clock that will tick over once per minute. It has a distinct click each minute, which is nice. It's not like a sweep, so it's very easy to tell which minute you're on. This also being only a 30-minute register instead of a 60-minute register, it's much easier to see the individual minutes, so it's very easy to read. But again, after it reaches the end of its first rotation, it will just continue going. So if you don't stop the chronograph, it will just run forever until the watch winds down, which is actually a good thing, and we'll get to that more in a minute. But first, the quirks that this particular ST19 movement has to it. The minor one is that the sweep on the chronograph isn't as smooth as it should be. It gets a little bit jumpy even though the timing seems to be accurate. The bigger problem to this one is that oftentimes when you engage the chronograph, if you don't give a very firm and solid push to it, the chronograph hand will jump before it starts, effectively rendering your timing inaccurate. So if you're trying to time something that is in seconds, it being 3 to 10 seconds off is going to be a big deal. So I found that I have to make a really conscious effort to press the chronograph start very firmly and rapidly in order to get it to start correctly. Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing there. And again, I've had other kinds of quirky things like this with other ST19 movement powered watches that I've had in for review. So I think this is primarily an issue with the Seiko movements that come out. All right, but let's go back to that functionality and how you use that 12-hour bezel. And I think the 12-hour bezel is just an amazing choice for this watch. You get so much use out of that. So one, most obviously, you can use the 12-hour bezel to track a second time zone. All you need to do is figure out what time it is in the time zone you want to track, and then line the bezel up so that that hour on the bezel is matching up with the current hour of the current time. And now the bezel is going to read you the time in your second time zone, and the dial is going to read you the time in your current time zone. It's very easy to change and adjust. If you're traveling, you can jump between different time zones and just rotate the bezel and readjust it. So it's a great feature for pilots. Also, because this is a 12-hour bezel and it has a pip at 12 o'clock, you can easily use it the same way you'd use a dive time bezel. Just line that pip up with your minute hand, and now the minutes are going to read back the elapsed minutes. It'll just be on a clock scale. So still very easy to read. But because this has the ST19 movement in it, which has a chronograph hand that does not stop after it's 30 minutes but continues, you can use that bezel to track things up to 12 hours. All you have to do is line the 12 o'clock pip on the bezel up with the hour hand instead of the minute hand. And so now when you look at the watch hours later, you just look at where the hour hand is pointing on the bezel, and that's going to tell you your elapsed hours. Conveniently, Hemel has also included half-hour pips in between the hour markers, allowing you to see which half of the hour you're in, because again, the minutes counter is only 30 minutes. But if you can see that the hour hand is pointing to the second half of the hour, then you know that you can just add 30 minutes to that minute counter, and you can figure out how many hours and minutes and seconds has passed since you started the timer, up to 12 hours. And there are very few chronographs that I've come across that allow you to accurately track timings over an hour like this, especially again in this affordable price range. So to see an old school mechanical chronograph give you that functionality in the way that it was kind of designed and intended, making full use of that 12-hour bezel, that was something that just I really was kind of geeking out about, and I just love that about this watch. Now there is one complaint about the bezel, and that's that it is a unidirectional bezel. This watch is supposed to have a bidirectional bezel on it. That would allow you to use the 12-hour bezel much more easily, so you could spin it in either direction to line it up with the hour hand or the second time zone. I assume this was just a cost-saving measure. It's probably easier to get unidirectional bezels because they're much more common. So yeah, one of my complaints there. It is a very nice bezel, great bezel action, 120 clicks, so really solid there. But again, I think it should have been a bidirectional. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the lume on this watch. And the lume, it looks amazing. It's not particularly potent though. Particularly on this one, it's very striking in the dark with that fully loomed dial. It looks really cool, and it actually, they have all of the hands loomed up, and with the fully loomed dial, you can really use a lot of the functionality of this watch in the dark. But they've gone with this kind of a brownish tint to the dial, which I think is kind of weakening the lume a little bit. And so while you do get a nice initial glow, it doesn't last particularly long. But anyways, here's how it stacks up against some other comparable watches. So I have this going up against two other watches in my collection. The Alba is a Seiko sub-brand, so this is using Seiko's Lume Bright, and then the Zelos is using, I believe, BGW9. And you can see that the Hemel fades out long before either of these. The dial lasts for about a half hour or so of really good usage, and then after that the hands hang on a bit longer. And if we measure this at 1 hour using my J-score system, using the dials and the handset to average out, the Hemel winds up scoring a 2, which means it's about 20% as bright as a Seiko Samurai. So again, about a half hour of really good usage. I think in the dark it's going to look really cool, but it's not going to stack up there with some of the more high-powered full lume dialed watches that I've seen. So overall, this is one of my favorite chronograph watches that I've gotten to check out. It's just such a fun watch to have on the wrist. Great look, and I love the solidness of the design. Again, I often feel like the ST19 is a little bit of a fragile movement, but it feels really well protected inside the case that Hemel's put together here. Concerns and complaints, we've been through a couple of them, but yeah, the ST19 movement has some quirks. I wish they would have put a bidirectional bezel on there. And the last one I haven't mentioned yet is the crown size. The crown is fairly narrow. It's kind of a thin crown, which makes it a little bit difficult to grip, which is kind of an issue when it's a hand-wound watch. You are going to be using the crown a lot. You're going to have to wind the watch every day, and adjusting the time is a little bit more difficult than I think it needs to be. I think the crown looks great, nice and slim and tucked in there on the case, but it would have been nice if it would have been a little bit easier to use. Now you can pick up this watch from Hemel on their website. I believe they're stocked now, but they've been having a hard time keeping this in stock. This has become a really huge hit for them, and I think it's pretty well deserved. I think at that $499 price point, they are offering an amazing watch, even despite the flaws that were in there. And probably because of that, they're actually getting ready to release some new versions of it. There's actually, I think, a couple of different versions using this case and bezel. They're going to be coming out with another dial design, which Marvin, the owner of Hemel, sent me a kind of sneak peek at that, so you guys can take a look at that, which also looks really cool. And I was really happy that Marvin was able to loan me this one in for review. I'll be hanging on to it for one or two other videos, but eventually I'll probably be shipping it back to him. Anyways, let me know what you guys think of this watch. Drop me a comment down below. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, hit the subscribe button too. We've got a lot more videos coming out. And I've also got a lot of giveaways coming out, so make sure you subscribe for those. The post office is finally shipping here in Japan, so really excited about that. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you later. Bye.